As a break, let's take a look at Colony Delta, a break from, of course, the famous victory in Fields of Glory. I'm going to be kind of slogging through. I played this recently. I've played it a handful of times in my life. My history with it, I picked it up brand new, at a convention. Now, I picked it up long after it's 79, at least when the artwork was done, but I assume the game was, done in 79 as well. I picked this up when I was in college, probably 86, 87, somewhere around there. From a dealer at a convention, along with Diadem, a very interesting game covering multiple planets. You transit between the planets, and it focuses kind of on the near-planetary and on-planet combat, rather than just kind of abstracting that all away. Kind of abstracts away the jump movement, which, in a game like Fifth Frontier War or Imperium, which I have above it, most of the map is just space you don't use. Well, instead in Diadem, they detail in on a few planets, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so, and the fighting is all done within the planets. No in-system fighting, really, just near planetary fighting. Anyway, on to this. I got it, I think, the same year that I got the same convention that I at University of Rochester, which I was visiting for the con, that I finally managed to pick up Terrible Swift Sword. But these were like $5 for the two of them or something. It's Fantasy Games Unlimited. Fantasy Games Unlimited, I had some kind of experience with. I had bought one game of theirs, which I have kicking around also somewhere in here. Middle C, should be over there in the corner, which is sort of a diplomacy-like, but not entirely. There's more randomness involved in it. Something like a cross between Diplomacy and Kingmaker, in the sense that it uses cards for the nobles and you draw cards, etc. But you plot your movement, and more like Machiavelli and Kingmaker, because there's income and stuff like that. Okay. But that one had kind of disappointed me as being just not detailed enough, kind of like things like Blood Royale and stuff. I wanted something that fit more into the historical reality. FGU, they're most known for Chivalry and Sorcery, I would guess, which is this broad-spanning attempt at realism in a fantasy role-playing game. Like, just... And a horrible typeface on tiny little characters throughout the entire rule book. Really painful to read. I've never known anybody who played it regularly in a campaign, but there were ideas in it that I knew people would pull out. Personally, I thought it was just a bit too cumbersome. The system, it had like what might be an interesting one-on-one dueling game in it, but not something that I'd want to put inside a role-playing game. Multiple combat systems for jousting, for this, for that, for the other. All kind of not well integrated, if I recall correctly. I never played it, I just read through it, and it struck me as kind of a disorganized mess. However, with their board games, they seem to do a better job. And this particular one, even though my initial impression of Middle C wasn't terribly good, I think it is a fairly solid game. This particular one presents something that I've never seen any other game do. It presents a conquistador-like situation. Another one down there. That I've covered. In terms of you're exploiting resources and you have combat units that you can interfere with one another directly. The goal of the game is, within a certain number of turns, like Conquistador, to have the most victory points. Victory points are essentially money in it. You're going to be landing forces on a planet, but there's two things that make this game really unique in terms of being able to do an exploitation game where the military doesn't just dominate everything. In fact, I think in Conquistador, there's too many advantages to going military in it. In this, you go military, but it doesn't completely overshadow the game. So, what are those two instances? One is that the forces are essentially asymmetrical. You have Terrans who have Terran-like equipment, including these little air car hover units, and they have airplanes, and they have submarines to enable them to conquer all the different biospheres, I guess. The human troops themselves are going to be equipped with jetpacks so they can fly around as well. And you have these bugs. Now, the base systems aren't that different in the game, but the key to to understanding how the asymmetry ends up making the game less warlike is the bugs are naturally flyers. And in order for them to move ground movement or underwater, they build these little turtles. They don't have any surface movement, I guess. In order to fly, well, they naturally do that. They got wings. All right. The other factor is, well, maybe there's two, but the other major factor that even if you're both next to each other to begin with, that's an effect, is units are pretty good on defense, and there are all these natives that kind of clutter things up and end up under the control of the players, but they end up interfering with the player's ability to really launch attacks. They can be used as a defensive screen, essentially. So what you end up doing is really kind of trying to get away from the enemy and build up an area where you can exploit your resources the best, but you can also interfere with the enemy using the natives and using your own troops, and you need your own troops to defend you against the natives. Let's go over the units fairly simply. Most units only have two numbers on them, which is going to be a combat strength and an air or ground movement. They're considered the same for the most part, for humans at least, but some of the different units use them just as air, just as ground. Some units are going to have a third value in the center, which is ocean movement or underwater movement. The turtles also have that. And then you also have these numerical markers, which are going to be used for ore, any valuable ore you take off the planet. Ore is the reason that you're on this planet. Basically, these two races have collided on the single planet and tried to exploit it at the same time. You also have these little natives. And that's about it. All right. So let me go through I don't think there's any kind of play aid for this. Let me go through the sequence of play if I can find it. And I'll try to explain as much as I can, but I'm not going to go into every detail because I have played it fairly recently and I kind of remember most of it. However, I got to find the sequence of play. It also has some advanced rules. Wait, there is a play aid. There we go. All right. Doesn't have the sequence of play, but there is a sequence of play. Okay, so the first thing that happens in the game is you roll for weather on each turn. And what that is you're rolling a six-sided die. If you get a 6, there's bad weather. The advanced rules say you split it into 4 quadrants and roll a die for each quadrant, giving you a little bit more flexibility there. Not specified in the rules. Okay, so what does bad weather mean? Bad weather means you can't fly, which means if you're a flying unit and that's all you can do, like, say, an airplane or one of these bugs, well, not one of these. These don't have a movement allowance. These are colonists, and these are colonial cities. Both sides have the equivalent values in each. But if you're these military bugs, they only fly unless they're carried in a turtle. The turtles will allow them to use ground movement. So when there's bad weather, you're not allowed to fly at all. Question? Not covered in the rules. Well, what about the spaceships? Because you've got these spaceships here that have no combat value, but 8 flying movement points, and they're allowed to land at spaceports. Well, I more or less house ruled you can't land at spaceports during bad weather either. So if your quadrant's in bad weather, you're not going to be landing in space. All right, the next thing is purchasing reinforcements. And this is the Terran player turn. The Sigma Draconian player. Yes, this is Colony Delta. The Sea Dracs. I like them. They're cool. They have more interesting things. Basically, each side is able to buy, using victory points, specific types of units. Oh, you know what I didn't mention? I didn't mention Capellans, which are, in addition to the natives. These are very much like humans, with slightly different stats. So the humans have, higher combat ability and lower movement. And then they have these air cars, which are a little faster and weaker than the hovercraft. You can buy these. These are mercenaries, along with your regular units. Now, if you're playing with the diplomacy random tables and such, not, which of course we will be because we like to play with all advanced and optional rules, you may be deprived the right to buy them. But I think you're not allowed them at all in the basic game, so that's okay. All right. So you purchase your reinforcements, and for the most part, these are all going to show up on your home planet. The next thing you do is you move your units. Now, this is ground movement. Well, this is movement on the planet. The one thing you're not allowed to move at this point is Terran air units that are attacking. They have a special kind of split movement that kind of could happen at this point, because the next thing is Terran aircraft fly to attack. Then you're going to roll your combat, and combat is handled pretty simply. Standard combat results table with odds. I don't remember if there's a terrain effects on this. I seem to think there was. Okay, there's a movement point cost. So if you're using ground movement, which usually you won't, because the Sigidrax and the humans and everything all fly, the turtles have to use ground unit and during ground movement, and during bad weather you have to use ground movement. So there's a movement effects table here for that. In combat terrain, peacekeepers, those are the human troops, are doubled in forests and tripled in mountains. And Sigma Drac, turtles are doubled in forests, badlands, and in mountains when defending. Green is forests, dark brown is mountains, this kind of tannish color is the badlands. All right, so you roll on a combat here, and what you're going to get is a result for one player or the other, indicating what proportion of their strength points they lose. There are exchange results in here, all standard, wargaming type principles apply here in terms of rounding and all that crap. Okay, then you're allowed to roll for natives. Now, in the basic game, you just roll for how much damage the natives do. In the advanced game, you roll a die, cut it in half, and that's how many natives you get. They come in forests and mountains, and they're only allowed to move on ground. However, they pay 1 movement point per hex that they move through. They're allowed... You move them along with your regular units. They're allowed to attack with your regular units, but they're not allowed to stack with them, which means you can support attacks with your aligned natives. The Capellans are totally different. They count as your own troops, basically. Then the Terran aircraft complete a movement back to base. They have to land at a base. I'm not quite sure. I wasn't playing the Terrans last time, so I didn't pay too much attention to this, and my wife didn't use them. They have to be in a spaceport, and I think they don't count against stacking, actually. I'm not sure. We do have stacking limitations, so maybe they do count. There's a maximum of 5 units in a hex. Yeah. Looks like 4 combat units. Okay, and everything that has a military strength is a combat unit. So the little spaceships don't count against your combat strength, but everything else are against your stacking limits, but everything else does, including air units. Air units have to return back to a spaceport each turn. So they have 12 movement points complete. If they fly out, say 6 movement points, they can fly back 6 movement points. Air movement's 1 point each. But let's say they fly outside their range, they're going to have to find someplace else to rebase. Anytime during your movement that you get 5 of these together, which is maximal stacking, you end up being able to exchange, well, you must exchange them for a spaceport, which is unable to be transported, but it allows you to land your spaceship there. You start the game with 1 spaceport, you got to start shipping everything else you want down. If you lose your spaceport, you have an opportunity to rebuild it. It costs something like 40 victory points. If you don't have 40 victory points, it costs all your remaining victory points, and you get it without having to pay more. Basically, the government subsidizes you or whatever. All right, where are we? Okay. Advance and retreat after combat. I don't remember how this works. Yeah, that's just built into the combat factor. The guy who loses units has to retreat. The other guy can advance units into the hex, in fact must. When you attack a hex, you have to have the movement points to enter that hex. So you're basically paying to enter the hex and then you fight in it. Okay. Terran player receives farming victory points. Again, this differs between the basic and advanced game. In the basic game, in the plains, you get 1 victory point per colonist that is farming. This is going to count as 5 colonists for farming or for mining. If you're playing the advanced game, you can also get a half point for farming in the forests, and you get double victory points for farming in a lake space, and there aren't a lot of those. These just get added right to your track. The next thing you do is space movement. You can move one of these and they can carry a load of stuff, but it has to stack down to a spaceport, or alternatively you can carry mining ore back up to your home planet. You can only go one way each turn. So you'll be bringing colonists down one turn and then bringing ore back the next turn. You probably want at least 2 spaceships to keep you constantly able to reinforce yourself. After that, you're going to do mining operations where you get counters equal to the number of colonists in a space with a star. The stars are mines. Again, spaceport produces 5. That's the basic game rules. The advanced game, if you're in the mountains or in the ocean, your mining is considered to be more effective, and you'll get twice the number of colonists in ore. You can carry something like 40 ore in the spaceship going up, and it has likewise certain costs to carry it aboard various transport mechanisms. It's fairly easy to transport all the ore you want. I think you can transport it infinitely as long as you're moving overland. Okay. And then if you've brought ore back, and this isn't stuff you just mined, it's stuff you brought back during the space segment before the mining segment, you're going to get 2 victory points per piece of ore you get. So mining is doubly as effective as farming. Farming is just to try to sustain the colony and not have to deliver so much supplies in there. But on the negative side, it's hard to transport. It's like gold versus farming in Conquistador. This game very much seems derivative of Conquistador in terms of the spirit. But I'm telling you, if you try to play Conquistador 2-player, what you're going to see is one guy has the advantage, builds lots of military units, and wipes the other one out. They've managed to thread the needle on this one and fix that issue. So that makes an interesting two-player game. In fact, Conquistador might end up military too easily. You also don't have the exploration side of things in this. And then you move the game turn marker forward. The basic game is to play for 12 turns. Whoever's got the most victory points wins. I don't think you get score for anything on... Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, if you get 1,000 victory points, you win. Is that the advanced game? Yeah, that's the advanced game. Sorry. The basic game is you play like 12 turns. Whoever has the most victory points wins. The advanced game is you have to get to 1,000 victory points. Now, in the advanced game, you secretly pick where your spaceports are. I don't remember how you set up in the basic game. I'm not going to look that up. Basically, each person essentially writes down where they want their initial spaceport to be. If they're in the same space, they do it again. They can keep picking the same place, so you may never get started in the game. All right, that's an idea of the game. Without going into all the details of the rules, when I feel comfortable with a game, I'm perfectly fine doing something that's more useful to people. We'll hit the playthrough shortly.